You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably, with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Somebody there?
Hello, once again, for another journey into the unexplored, the unexplained Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson.
And we have another ghost story for you this week, folks, because I know you love ghost stories.
Yeah, but this time it's local.
It is local. It's actually happened in San Francisco, and it has rather a famous connection to it as well.
Yep.
Kearny
And you can walk there.
Where is Kearny Street? Do you live on Kearny Street or near Kearny Street?
No, but I live near there.
Okay.
I live near there. It's in the financial district, and it's only a few blocks from me.
Oh, there you go. We love to uncover these weird stories in big cities and stuff back in the day. And this one actually has a Virginia City. This one has a Virginia City, Nevada tie to it as well. So it's the ghost of Kearny Street. Should we dig right in?
Yes, let's go ahead.
All right. So back on January of 1866, a man wrote about a spirit residing on Kearny Street in San Francisco. Now, this story was published in the Territorial Enterprise, which is a newspaper in Virginia City, Nevada. And the man who wrote it, the San Francisco correspondent for the paper, was none other than Mark Twain. Now, disembodied spirits have been on the rampage now for more than a month in the house of one Albert Crum in Kearny Street. So much so that the family find it impossible to keep a servant for 48 hours. The moment a new and unsuspecting servant maid gets fairly to bed and her light blown out, and one of those dead and damned scallywags takes her by the hair and just hazes her, grabs her by the waterfall and snakes her out of bed and bounces her on the floor 2 or 3 times. Other disorderly corpses shy old boots at her head, who in boot jacks and brittle chamber furniture, wash bowls, pitchers, hair oil, teeth brushes, hoop skirts, anything that comes handy, those phantoms seize and hurl at Bridget, and pay no more attention to her howling than as if it were music. Now the spirits tramp, tramp, tramp about the house in the dead of night, and when a light is struck, the footsteps cease, and the pomander is not visible. And just as soon as the light is out, the dead man's eyes waltzing around again. They are a bloody lot. The young lady of the house was lying in bed one night with the gas turned down low when a figure approached her through the gloom, whose ghastly aspect and solemn carriage chilled her to the heart. What do you suppose she did? Jumped up and seized the intruder, threw a slipper at him, laid him with a misquotation from Scripture? No, none of these. But with admirable presence of mind, she covered up her head and yelled, "That is what she did." Few young women would have thought of doing that. The ghost came and stood by the bed and groaned, a deep, agonizing, heartbroken groan, and laid a bloody kitten on the pillow by the girl's head. And then it groaned again and sighed, "Oh God, and it must be," and yet another bloody kitten. It groaned a third time in sorrow and tribulation and went one kitten better. And thus the sorrowing spirit stood there moaning in an anguish and unloading its mewing cargo, until it sacked up a whole litter of 9 little bloody kittens on the girl's pillow, and then, still moaning, moved away and vanished. When lights were brought, there were kittens with finger marks of bloody hands upon the white fur, and the old mother cat had come after them, swelled her tail in mortal fear, and refused to take hold of them. What do you think of that? What do you think of a ghost that came to your bedside at the dead of night and had kittens? I would say this article, by the way, that was the end of the article.
Yeah.
Definitely written by Mark Twain. It has his...
because of the sensationalism in it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm sure... You got to wonder if any of this is true, to be honest with you. There might have been footsteps and something happening in the house. They might have heard stuff, but this whole thing about the kittens and the moaning in the bedside, you got to wonder how much of that is real. You know what I mean?
I do.
Let's go on and have you do the second article, and then we'll talk about it, all of it, afterwards.
Sure.
Hey everyone, Eric here. I am the host of the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Join me for a new episode every Wednesday as I delve into the unseen world with historians, authors, researchers, and investigators as we try to understand and make sense of the paranormal. You can listen to past and future episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or at unseenparanormalpodcast.com. Please like the show on Facebook and share with your friends. And remember, some of the scariest things are unseen.
Okay, well, in 1866, Mark Twain wrote a newspaper story called The Kearny Street Ghosts that has haunted the minds of San Franciscans ever since. And he was a San Francisco correspondent for a Virginia City newspaper called the Territorial Enterprise, and allegedly reported the story after conversations with a real live San Francisco resident. So here's how Twain's tale went about. It's the 1800s, and a man named Albert Crumb, he can't seem to keep a maid in the house. And every time a maid goes to her bedchamber to sleep after a day of work, within moments of turning out the lights, she's attacked by what they call dead and damned scallywags. So she's probably attacked, which means she's attacked by spirits. So one spirit in particular seemed to show up more often than the rest, which was a tall, shadowy male figure intent on attacking women. He takes maids by the hair and grabs them by the waterfall, which was probably somebody's private parts, probably a term for it, before bouncing them on the floor 2 or 3 times to get his thrills. The man hurls things at the maids, like wash bowls and boots and hoop skirts, and he's really loud. He's stomping around, and Crumb or the rest of the family never ever hears the spirit or come to the maid's aid during the attacks for some reason. They never hear them or help her. So as soon as the maids manage to get their lanterns lit again, the stomping stops and the haunting ceases. No one knows who is messing with them, or it's just that it keeps happening over and over again. And Crumb he keeps having the problem with nobody to help it. So they say that it's told that it was not really the kind of life that he pictured when he moved into his Kearny Street home, which actually was a very well-off home. And everything changed when he hired a new maid named Bridget. She gets into bed, she turns out the light, just like the rest of them. And as soon as she does, the tall figure appears in the corner of the room again. And he comes toward her, just like he did with the rest of them. And he was, rather than be afraid, she pulls the covers up over her head, starts screaming bloody murder, something that Twain said that most young females would never think to do. So while she does that, while she's doing that, screaming, the ghost moves way over to the bed, and standing over her, he lets out a groan and lays a white kitten covered in blood on the pillow by her screaming head. He moans again, and he puts another kitten on her pillow. He repeats the same thing till there's a pile of 9 meowing kittens covered in blood before vanishing. So she peeks out from under the pillow. She lights her lantern. She sees a litter of kittens with bloody fingerprints all over them. And the white mama cat goes into the room, sees the kittens, and, she swells up, probably her hind, in her tail. You know how cats do that. And she wants nothing to do with the kittens. So Twain ends the story with, well, what do you think of that? What would you think of a ghost that came to your bedside at the dead of night and dumped kittens?
Yes, what do you think, Verna?
Well, San Francisco is full of hauntings, and if it was an old a house back then where somebody else previously lived and they moved out, I don't doubt that there were spirits in that house, and there were restless spirits in that house. And I know that Twain was full of sensationalism. I know that, he really played up the article.
Yeah.
But I do believe he had a real conversation with somebody about it. And I'm not even sure Twain could even make up a story like Bloody Kittens. Twain was an animal lover. He had cats.
And he's still an author. That doesn't mean he can't create fiction.
That's true.
I still stick to the fact that the family probably was having footsteps, things being thrown, things being dropped, maybe even disembodied voices moaning. But all the stuff with the kitten, I think, is completely, utterly fictionally made up.
It could be fictionally made up. Now, I don't doubt the family was probably a typical family that had, people had pets back then. They probably had a mother cat and kittens. And maybe this Albert Crumb, whoever he was, talked about it, and Twain made up the story that they were bloody kittens rather than just saying, oh, well, he dumped a kitten. Maybe he could have dumped a kitten, but maybe it wasn't bloody. Who knows?
Yeah, it could be, but I still think there were reports of this incident happening. Twain was sent from Virginia City, where, by the way, he was working at the Territorial Enterprise, and at the time, he was repeatedly told to stop making stuff up when he wrote for that newspaper.
He was chased out of town for it, in fact.
Yeah, he wasn't in Virginia City very long, but the time that he was there, he would sensationalize the most trivial things. There would be a fight, and he would make up the entire background. He'd make it sound much more exciting than it was. And you're right, he was driven out of town from the people because he made up stories when he lived in Virginia City. So obviously, and this was when he first became an author, because he was first starting out. So this is what kind of triggered his career. Like, oh, I could become an author. So being sent to San Francisco on a word that, oh, this family on Kearny Street in San Francisco is having spiritual encounters, footsteps, moaning, that he goes there, he interviews the family, they tell him the regular normal stuff that happened. And I think he's thinking, how can I make this even more scary or sensationalistic than it already is? How can I bring this back to my newspaper and people will be fascinated by it? And then he adds the whole thing about the kittens. I mean, where are the kittens coming from? Why are they bloody? It just doesn't make sense to me in any way.
It wouldn't make sense. I could see it being him having a conversation with somebody and saying, "Oh, can you believe it? There's a ghost in my house," and I can believe that they had a maid named Bridget, because they hired maids back then, and there was a lot of immigrants back then, and she was probably an Irish immigrant. And I can believe that he mentioned about the noises, that the maids couldn't handle the noise and they left. And as I mentioned, they were probably a rich family with pets, and they probably had kittens and a cat. And he probably mentioned that the mother cat probably didn't like the noise around or something, an ordinary conversation. And then Twain just kind of trumped it up and he played it up, and made it into something other than what it was. Now, my reaction is, I wonder if there really was an Albert Crumb unless he made up his name because he didn't want to use the real name out of credibility. You know how some people were worried about their credibility. If he used his real name, what would Albert Crumb have thought about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, with the San Francisco, because this was the Territorial Enterprise for Virginia City, Nevada, this paper, I don't know if that story, it probably was reprinted in the Chronicle in San Francisco, but any other local stories before Twain wrote this, they would be gone because of the earthquake, because they lost all their records for the Chronicle up to a certain point. 1888 in there is when the ones they have, and the only reason they have them is because of they're from like Sacramento and Oakland and other outlier parts of San Francisco Bay Area. So the actual city stuff is gone. So this is probably an important record, but not exactly a historical record because it's not going to be accurate.
Well, what I was wondering now was the Territorial Enterprise that was distributed in San Francisco as well as Virginia City, wasn't it?
I don't think so. It's not a big.
I know it was a smaller world back then, and counties pretty much didn't get around as much. I mean, with their local stuff they didn't share it as much.
That doesn't mean that the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle, or one of the other papers didn't reprint it. From the Territorial Enterprise, which is very likely, especially if it's about a local house.
Yeah.
But I mean, you saw the building in Virginia City. It's tiny. It's tiny. It's like a 2-room office upstairs in a 2-story old wooden building. In fact, below the newspaper used to be an old store or bank.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I remember you and I, when we went to Virginia City, we went past that office, and I took a picture in front of the sign where the actual paper was. I would have loved to have gone inside.
Yeah, but, the actual Territorial was upstairs. The upper floor was the 2 rooms upstairs. Now I've investigated the basement where the old bank was, where the old supermarket or the old store was. That's an interesting place down there. There's a lot of old antique store down there, all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's, I don't know. It's a long way to go to be sent to do a story on this. So it must have been enough of a haunting, enough of a story that it got enough attention where this guy all the way in Nevada, in Virginia City, this paper said, hey, this sounds like an interesting story. We should send a correspondent. Let's send Mark Twain out to interview them and do up an article about it. I wonder if at this point he must not have been making up too much stuff yet. Otherwise, they would never have sent him that far. I'm guessing. Go
ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, if you're almost run out of town, chances are you're not going to be sent all the way to San Francisco, several states over, just to write an article about a ghost story. Because they were like, why would you give that to a man who makes stuff up?
That's true. Now I imagine Twain. I've never read all of Twain's articles, but I ran across them. I ran across his articles in old books, and of course, I wanted to buy the old books because they said part of the Territorial Enterprise, but it's always super expensive, so I couldn't buy it. But he wrote more than about ghost stories. He wrote about all kinds of stuff, and ghost stories, he didn't write too many ghost stories. So for him to have a conversation and him thinking that it was enough to get people's attention, without him, I think that the story would have been so much better and more credible if he just
talked
about it and stuck to the facts and wrote a serious article about it rather than a sensationalized, because people are going to read it, and maybe some of them will believe it at the time, but most people are just going to shrug it off, like, oh, I don't believe that happened. So,
yeah, and it's funny when you said he doesn't. I don't know if he's written ghost stories. I don't know if he's written any. I don't know myself. But the fact that the stuff about the kittens, because none of it makes sense, kind of has the earmark of somebody who hasn't written any ghost stories.
Right. Well, what I'm trying to say is I ran across a few of his articles from there, but they were mostly in hardback books where they included them. But I thumbed through them, and I didn't see a ghost story at the time. I saw he wrote about lots of things, politics and and what was going on at the time, lots of things, but not ghost stories. So this was something that piqued my interest when I saw it. I wish he would have put the address of Kearny Street, because I would have loved to walk past the building, whatever it is now. But
yeah, I think I have other books on this that I could probably find that.
Yeah,
I have the story in my other books, not Twain's article, but actual the story of the actual haunting and information might have it. I might actually have the newspaper articles in the Chronicle that talk about it and reprint it, because the Chronicle has no problem giving you the street address. That's why I love that they used to do that, because it helps us today to find the place.
Yeah, because he gave the name of the guy, and likely he gave it for two reasons. He gave it to give him credibility that he had an actual conversation with somebody, or I don't know. Crumb is not a common name anymore, so he could have had a conversation with the real Albert Crumb on Kearny Street. I guess we have to check San Francisco records. We wanted to find out if there was a real person.
I just think it's a subject he doesn't really that interested in. I don't think he had that much of an interest in it. And the fact that he said, one thing that makes me think about the fact that a lot of it is fiction is when the girl pulled her covers over her head, and he said something other young women would have thought of doing. Few young women would have thought of doing that. Well, that's not true. I think that's why he wrote that. That's the most common thing. Oh, look, a woman pulled his covers over her head and started screaming. I don't think any other young woman would have thought to do that. I think that's what he's trying to be ironic.
Yeah, I know, because that's the first thing they would have done. Yeah.
It's a little tongue-in-cheek on his half that I think he's kind of making fun of the whole thing. And I think he just added the bloody kitten stuff because he thought it was all so ridiculous. I don't know. I cry fiction after the things being thrown around, maybe the groans, and that kind of stuff. But all the man walking into the room, attacking her, grabbing her, giving her the bloody kittens one after the other on the pillows. It just doesn't make logical sense to me. I mean, we know ghost stories. We know ghost stories that are
absolutely
back in the day. They would have had, most of them said, well, the specter said this and announced it wanted this, or this is the reason it was talking to her. But none of that is in there. He doesn't even care what the groaning specter says. It's just one bloody cat, two bloody cats, 9 little bloody cats on the girl's pillow. Can you ever put 9 bloody cats on one pillow? Are they going to stay on the pillow?
Well, they were little kittens, so who knows how tiny they were.
But why would she continually lay there while he
why would it put it on the pillow next to her? The bloody kittens, I know.
I was going to say 9 bloody kittens, and she's still laying on the pillow screaming.
Yeah, it sounds a little off. I agree with you. Yeah.
So I call foul on this. Not that I'm a bit surprised, because it is Mark Twain, and he is a fiction writer.
Right. So. He's known for that. He's known for his sensationalism. I love his fiction. Don't get me wrong. I have I have a few of his books, and his fiction's great. But I think that's, some people have their niche, and I think he was meant to be more of a fiction writer than he was a journalist. Yep, even though he wasn't a bad writer either way.
Not at all, but I think he took this back to the newspaper. They probably printed it. Well, obviously they did. And I think this kind of skyrocketed from there. He thought, wow, look at the sensation that happened from that article. If I write some of my Virginia City articles and kind of tart them up, people will be enthralled, they'll be entertained, I can, hone my craft. And then he honed his craft a little too much, and they ran him out of Virginia City.
Right, exactly. A lot of authors started out as journalists, and they either it was their strong point or it wasn't, and they went on to fiction, and he was one of them. And I don't think it was his strong point, but
it's funny.
I wonder what Albert Crumb might have thought if there was a real Albert Crumb. He probably would have shook his head and said, why did he sensationalize it like that? But or he might have not have been surprised, because journalists do that.
Yep, that's what I'm thinking. He probably wrote that none of that happened, but he's so far away in Virginia City that there's nothing he can do. It's not like today where you could pick up the phone or send your lawyer out and sue him.
No, it was a different world.
Yeah. So
he probably thought that the chances of Albert Crumb seeing it and and it's probably going to be very slim.
Yep. What's
Yeah.
interesting is, do you remember, I think wasn't it Mark Twain that said the coldest summer he ever had was in July in San Francisco?
The coldest winter I've ever spent was the summer in San Francisco. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if he was there during the summer and this article came out in January of 1866, if that's the summer he meant, just before this.
Who knows? I mean, it sounds like something he would have said.
I mean, I don't know. He could have been here more. He could have been in San Francisco more than once. I don't know. But I just thought that was interesting, that quote. And then the article's printed in January of 1866. So
It could have been he was talking about a past trip.
mm-hmm.
He mentioned that some woman came up to him in San Francisco and said, they were talking about religion. She said, "Do you believe in baptism?" And he said, "Ma'am, not only do I believe it, I've seen it."
Great answer.
I love Mark Twain, but
Yeah.
but as far as credibility with articles, well, but it's a great
Yeah.
story. There's a lot of ghost stories back in San Francisco from that time, and I wish they would print more of them, but
Yeah,
well.
unfortunately, you have to comb through what newspapers there are to find them. And I've found some, but most of them have already been talked about because they're bigger ones. But sometimes they're a little blurb, 3-4 paragraph little items in the back of the paper, which you'd never know how to find it unless you were looking for it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, you have to really search for them, but it's cool that they printed them back then, and people had a lot to say about it.
Yep. And in fact, I want to look to see if I can find other stories on this real story, not Twain's article, but other ones, to see if we can find out where this house was. It might not even be there anymore. It could just been long gone.
Even if it's not there anymore, I'd like to walk past the address and see because you know how it is that even when a new building is built over the old one,
Yep.
energy of a place still lingers, of a former place still lingers in the area.
Well, the Monroe House.
both
Remember
know
we did
that.
the show about the Monroe House?
Yes.
And they tore it down and they built that giant apartment building. But people in the apartment building have had experiences that are on the same land. So you never know.
You never know. So, and I could probably walk there myself, and maybe you come with me, and we could both take a picture in front of the address, and maybe kind of like we did on Maiden Lane when we were investigating the St. Francis. The party started in Maiden Lane before it got to St. Francis. So we were able to get some voices about it, some EVPs about that party.
We can try and do a little EVP there. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
First, we must find the address.
We got to find the address first. That's the main thing. Yeah.
Yep. That's an interesting story, though. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard of his article about that. So that's interesting.
Right. And I think that and this is just me thumbing through researching, I think they mentioned that the address is in zip code 94108. And that's very near my zip code, so I think it is walking distance.
Yeah, we just have to poke around, and maybe the library's database, we can look it up and find out.
That would be very cool. Yeah, and we could do that.
Check it out. All right, that's interesting story. Another ghost story. We always love a good ghost story on Ecto Portal.
Of course. Yeah.
And all right, so I guess that's it for this week, folks. And until next week, we will talk again.
Yeah, we'll talk to you then. See you next week. Bye.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.